I'll just sort of do what we did last year, which is give like a presentation on our access and digitization grants and cover some things. Okay, so all right. Well, if everybody can hear me, I'll go ahead and get started since it is time. I am Ashley Beavers, the Digital Projects and Preservation Librarian here at CLRC. I digitize and create metadata for in-house grant projects, coordinate with members on when they can come into the office to use our equipment or to borrow it, provide training on using all of our equipment and how to create metadata, answer questions relating to digitization, metadata, and more. I also help members with their projects at whatever step they are at. So even if it isn't an access and digitization grant project, if you have a question like on what DPI you should scan your collection, I'll answer you and probably give you more advice and help. I run digitized materials with text on them through OCR, and that is a free service to our members. I also upload collections onto New York Heritage or New York State Historic newspapers. And since I am your New York Heritage liaison, I make corrections to uploaded collections and update information on landing pages. In addition, I provide training for Empire ADC, a repository for finding aids. So getting you started on creating finding aids from scratch, or if you already have some, getting those up on Empire ADC, as well as making corrections to finding aids that are already public. Another service is our digital dark archive, which I haven't been able to work on in a while. And that is essentially a backup of a backup of a backup of your digitized materials. So we would be your last resource for retrieving your digitized collections if something were to happen to your other backups. And lastly, EASY, I believe is how you pronounce it, or Empire State Immersive Experiences. It is a repository for 360-degree images. So if you are interested, let me know. And I also handle our access and digitization grants. And lastly, before moving on, if at any point you have a question, you can write it in the chat or interrupt me, and I'll check the chat before I move on to each slide, just in case. So we will be covering general information on the Access and Digitization Grant, go into the pre-application, then identifying projects for this grant and what successful applications tend to have, then cover CLRC's DigLab contracts and our digitization and metadata services. And this year we are accepting in-house projects, and then provide project examples, go through the grant timeline, and if there's time, go through the application, but I'll definitely make sure there's time for questions at the end. And so the goal of these access and digitization grants is we want to do as much as we can for all of you to submit the best possible project. So by you knowing our process, it will hopefully prepare you to put forth a project that is fully formed and gets an easy approval from our committees. This year, we have $45,000 set aside in the budget for these access and digitization grant projects. We've tended to fund at least in part all viable projects, and this year we'll see how many applications come through and what our review committee thinks. You do need to be a member of CLRC from one of the 4 counties listed and shown. You also need to be either a full or affiliate membership level. And for those of you watching now and afterward, I've provided links on the slide page to our member directory and membership levels pages, and these slides will be available to registrants and on our YouTube channel. For those of you who are in one of our counties and are interested in joining, see if you are already a member, and if not, see which membership level best fits your organization. Likewise, for those of you who aren't members and are not sure if your organization can join CLRC, but for reasons, but you want to include your collections on New York Heritage, reach out to your library and check if they are members, which they probably are, and see if a collaboration can occur, so then your organization's collections can be included in New York Heritage. These grants will be reviewed by our Library Resources Committee as well as an external review committee. The LRS committee is made up of representatives from our members, and they'll go through all the applications and judge them on worthiness, plan, and budget. And then their recommendations are reviewed by an external committee, which is made up of colleagues from our other library councils of the state. This external committee helps us catch anything that we might have missed. Then the final step is our board approves those recommendations, and then I'll notify you of the results. And one of the benefits of this structure is that I can help advocate on behalf of your projects, since I won't be the one making decisions. And so the more information you provide and work with me on answering questions, the more we're able to explain it to the committees and the board, and that helps. So for this year's grant cycle, we are requiring Access and Digitization Grant pre-applications. And this is just to allow staff to give feedback on the application and to issue a DigLab quote for the project if it applies. In the pre-application, you do not have to include budget information, but you can if you want to. You do not need to have a vendor quote already. And if you have one, wait until you receive feedback, as you might have to get a new quote depending on the size of your project. And you do not need to have copyright permissions, but if you do have it, you can go ahead and email it to me. After you have submitted the pre-application, we will review it and see if anything is missing or needs to be added or elaborated on, and then through a meeting, let you know where in your application there needs to be improvement. When you've made the changes to your application, you can submit the full application. If you didn't need any improvements, you can just copy and paste what you put in the pre-application, but make sure you include your budget information into the full one and then submit it. If you do need to make edits, make sure you put them in the full application. And as well, email me your outside vendor quote and copyright permission if it applies to your grant, to your project. The full application will be available after the pre-application deadline, and you must submit a pre-application in order to submit a full application later. So again, the full application is available after the pre-application, and you must have submitted a pre-application in order for your full application to be considered. For the full application, you will need the budget information filled out, provide an outside vendor quote and copyright permissions if it applies. I will have your DigLab quote, but you can send it to me if it helps you feel like you've sent in everything. We are requiring an outside vendor quote in case the DigLab is unable to take on your project. So this backup is to ensure that all applications have a chance of being funded. We generally see a range of projects that people apply for, and the biggest and most common one is digitization projects. And this is the conversion of an analog resource, so like a yearbook or something that exists physically, into a digital copy, a PDF of a digitized yearbook, or a physical photograph into a TIFF or JPEG. So this is where you're starting from an existing resource or item, digitizing it, creating metadata, and then uploading it to a repository like New York Heritage, New York State Historic Newspapers, or your own repository. We can work with a wide variety of formats. So in the DigLab, we've digitized photographs, yearbooks, registers, which were cemetery and hotel or inn and tavern, newspapers that were bound and unbound, glass plate negatives of various sizes, photograph slides, catalogs, and scrapbooks, to name a few. And digital formats used have been TIFF, JPEG, PDF, audio files, and video files. The last two might need to be exported into another format in order for them to be uploaded, but otherwise we're really flexible. And the focus is on creating access to these historical and cultural heritage materials. So the materials need to be publicly available. So something up on, again, New York Heritage, New York State Historic Newspapers, or your own repository. And this repository needs to have a repository structure. So something that is searchable and has an interface that can be used to search the database that contains the materials and records with metadata, and not just be images on a WordPress website with no information. There cannot be a paywall. It should be accessible to the public without their having to ask for it and without any other impediments similar to that. There is room for flexibility, but it needs to be somewhere that is accessible. And the materials and collection can be up on more than one repository because it doesn't hurt to have it up in multiple places. If you have materials that don't seem like they would fit in New York Heritage, it doesn't mean that they're not eligible for this grant. It just means that we would have to have a more in-depth conversation about where they're going to end up and how they're going to be accessible. So for all of you, I encourage you, and especially those who have projects that you're not sure of, to reach out to me and we can discuss the particulars of your projects. We can help work it out and make sure your project is eligible and explain how it's eligible to the review committee. Another type of project we receive and is an aspect of digitization is metadata. So metadata is data about data. And a way to look at it is the descriptive work or cataloging that happens to make digital assets accessible. It helps describe things and helps you and others when searching and browsing materials. And this especially applies for materials that might not end up in one of our repositories, which I'll give an example in a bit. We do require that you know your metadata and that it falls under nationally recognized standards, which again feeds into that repository structure that we're looking for. You can use this grant to enhance existing metadata and or create new metadata. And this also applies to enhancing or creating finding aids, which is why I mentioned Empire ADC in the beginning. We really want digitized materials to be easily accessible and not hidden away, making it hard for people to find them. And since the majority of projects that we end up funding are digitization projects that have a metadata component, you have to catalog or create the descriptions in order to put them up in a repository. We also accept projects where the materials or collection has been digitized or is born digital. So you just need to create the metadata and put them up in a repository or augment them or add to what you already have so you can make them more easily accessible. Lastly, the materials have to be accessible because this isn't a way to catalog or create metadata for your content management system that you use internally. This has to be something the public can access. And the example I have is a collection I worked on and it went into a different repository, and that was Colgate University's Alma Gracie Stokey papers. And it is freely available through University Libraries of Colgate University's JSTOR. Now, there are a number of expenses that we don't support, and this is because these are a smaller grant and not really large all-encompassing grants that we're giving out. We don't cover overhead costs like rent, heat, or electricity. We also don't cover the purchase of new materials, so you need to already possess them before digitizing them. For oral history and community digitization projects, we would want you to know exactly what you're handling before you do it. We've turned down projects in the past that were asking the community to bring their items, and the people running the event wouldn't know who in the community is coming and what they are bringing. We want it to be something that you can give an inventory of what it's going to be processed. And when you don't know, it's going to make assessing the project harder and doing the work hard and uncertain. We also don't support direct payments to libraries for interlibrary loan costs. There are other programs in place for interlibrary loan. We also don't allow for the purchase of an integrated library system for individual libraries, so we don't fund the creation of a repository. Another thing we don't fund is hours an employee would already be working. The purpose of these grants is to increase capacity, so we're not subsidizing existing salaries. So if you already have a full-time staff member who is going to be doing this work, we wouldn't pay that staff member to do the work as part of the number of hours they're already working. So a lot of times this means if you're doing a project in-house, you might need to hire somebody part-time to do the work or to increase your capacity. And that can be trying and hard to work through for some organizations. We want to increase your capacity and don't want to subsidize what you're already doing. Plus, there is Syracuse University iSchool nearby, and if you are interested in hiring a student part-time to do the work on your grant project, please email me. The final one is we aren't able to fund projects that don't meet copyright requirements. So if you don't have permission to share something, we aren't going to fund this digitization and or metadata creation for those materials because the end goal is to be able to share them. So that's why throughout the application process, it is very important that you have the proper permissions or documentation for copyright. Our review committees do ask if these projects have copyright permissions, and if the answer is uncertain, then we would sometimes not fund or would have to wait until a clear answer is received before approving funding. So if you don't have copyright permission, try to obtain it or try your best in finding it and let me know if you were unsuccessful, because then I will make a note of it. When identifying projects, first you want to make sure you're identifying materials that are appropriate to be shared publicly, which meshes with the New York Heritage Collection Development Policy, and that is linked to on the slide page. You want materials to be of interest to a general audience, but if they are materials that are more sought after by a specific audience, this grant is also for that. An example is the Fletcher Steel scrapbooks, which are full of garden architecture photographs and planning and design sketches. And these were desired by a certain audience and were always in use. So by digitizing them, people have access to them and the original materials aren't always in use. You should consider copyright and privacy or access restrictions, such as having materials that were donated with a strict privacy restriction or access restriction. And those, depending on the restrictions, shouldn't be digitized and made freely available on the internet. There are even ethical considerations. There could be medical records that are under HIPAA restrictions, or even just sensitive materials that might result in some people being unhappy with their personal details being shared. When identifying projects, you might want to think about the best way to process them, and this gets into the activities of the grant. So who's going to be doing the work and how? And you might consider doing a project in-house and hiring someone or increasing somebody's part-time hours to do the project, or hire a vendor. But then you need to consider who will be doing the cataloging or metadata creation. If scanning equipment is an issue and or problem, as our member, we have scanners that we loan out. And in fact, one of the scanners is currently in use by a member. Or if you're close to our office, you can schedule a day and time with me to come in and use our equipment. Another consideration is the type of materials. Do you have the equipment or the ability to handle oversized materials or the quantity of materials? Are the materials in really bad condition? Do you smell vinegar coming from anywhere and it's not from a kitchen? If you happen to smell vinegar coming from your collections, then vinegar syndrome has started on a film or items that have been laminated. On staffing, what kind of time and talent do you have available to you? It's great to hire an intern and or temporary workers, but there's also the time it takes to train them and supervise. You don't have to worry about with training. I can help with training for digitizing and the metadata. Another part to consider that relates to metadata creation or cataloging is how much of an expert do you need to be able to process the materials. Some can be easy to do and self-describing, like a yearbook project, whereas a photograph that's been in a drawer, you might not have the context or information about it in order to really describe it. So that photograph might require a lot more subject knowledge of what it is and what's going on. Possibly the biggest factor when asking for a grant is how much will it cost. Once you've figured out who's going to do the work and how they're doing it, we like to see a reasonable budget in terms of if you've thought it through and how long the project is going to take. Make sure you're accounting for costs appropriately. We don't want you going over budget and we don't want you going under budget. Show your math when you've submitted the budget, because then we can check your math and see if we agree. And of course, if you need, please reach out to us and talk with us through all of these factors. We'd much rather help you figure out that in advance and have you submit an application that isn't reasonable or isn't realistic in terms of your goals and what you're hoping to accomplish. So successful applications will have a well thought out project plan where they have a certain amount of concisiveness, but not so much information that it's hard to get to the crux of what you're asking for and what you're trying to do. A good amount of detail is good and helps us to assess whether your plan is reasonable and detailed enough. Try to keep all of this in mind when you do your full application. So show your math for your budget, and you can show your hourly rate and how many hours you're expecting a project to take. And we can say whether or not it seems reasonable. Don't forget about copyright. So reach out to the copyright holder, get written permission from them, and then you can email it to me. If you're unable to find the copyright owner, let me know, because if you've tried searching and you haven't found any information or anyone that last had it, then we can work from there. Same with vendor quotes or any documentation. Vendor documentation is the quote from the vendor or any documents from them about what they're going to do, what they are charging, and for how much. We like to see institutions or organizations complete their projects successfully and on time, but we are understanding if something comes up. Just let us know. A hypothetical would be if you had a grant from us 3 years ago and haven't done anything on it. That doesn't look very good. We do have deadlines and a timeline for these projects, but we are reasonable in working with you on those timelines. And on completing reporting, this is referring to interim reports and final reports if you have projects with us previously. Both of our reports are easy and there aren't many questions. The questions are something like, what did you end up actually doing and how did that differ from what you expected? Do you have any feedback or advice on the process? And when turning those in, we don't need any receipts or a budget returned. We just want to know what you've accomplished and how it went. And both of them should take around 10 minutes or so to complete. And then something else to consider and remember, large projects can be split across multiple years. For our DigLab, we handle a good portion of our projects in-house. I've been tackling the remaining backlog of projects. So this year we are accepting projects in-house. We can digitize, as I said before, photographs, yearbooks, registers, newspapers, glass plate negatives, photograph slides, catalogs, scrapbooks, and more. And if your project is born digital, TIFFs, JPEGs, PDFs, audio, and video files. And as always, we do the upload process for you, but if you are interested in uploading your collections, let me know and I can train you and get you set up to do it. You can use this quote request link on the slide page to fill out the form about your project. And on the website, it's under Cultural Heritage Services. Then learn more about the DigLab, and then you'll see request a DigLab quote. And actually underneath it is equipment loan request. But after I read the applications, I'll make a note of which ones will need a DigLab quote. So you don't need to worry about this, but you now know that it's here. If you do wind up using this quote request form, be sure to give the number of photographs or a couple of samples of page totals. Also, if the materials are bound or loose, and if they are bound, that you prefer that the materials remain bound. Giving information about the size of your materials helps us determine which equipment can be used. Like if the materials are greater than 10 by 15, I know it will fit on the Kick Click Mini or the copy stand. It may be right at the edge of the lines for the Kick Click Mini, and then I'll know it will go for the copy stand. So this year, unlike in years past, I'm giving a couple more examples for specific parts, and this is DigLab digitization project examples. When I send the slides out, I will make sure to hyperlink them to projects that are accessible right now. And so these are Access Digitization Grant projects that were digitized in the DigLab, and were also cataloged, or metadata was created for them. And then here are two projects that were just cataloged in the DigLab. And next, these newspaper projects are a mix of DigLab digitization and Northern New York Library Network digitization. Northern does digitization of microfilm and integration of digitized newspaper files to New York State historic newspapers. So if you have digitized files of your newspapers like Tully Area Historical Society did from Fulton postcards way back then, you can apply for this grant to have those files uploaded onto New York State historic newspapers. And then here are some examples of members using vendors to have their materials digitized, and all of them but the last one are uploaded. And then these are projects that members have done themselves in-house. So digitizing and then reaching out to me to receive training on creating the metadata. The last three are projects currently being worked on. Now I'm going to go through the grant timeline, and these are listed on our website. So pre-applications are due December 16th, and after that, you'll receive a verbal and or typed feedback and a meeting from me and a DigLab quote if it applies to your projects, and then you can obtain an outside vendor quote and send it to me. Next is the deadline for a consultation, but you have from now, and actually was at the beginning of November, until January 20th, 2025 to request a consultation with me. So that's to go over your project, have questions answered, get recommendations on which vendors to use, all of that. This is just the last day to request a consultation. If we've already scheduled a meeting for after that day, you're okay. The full application deadline is January 31st, 2025. So this is your full application plus outside vendor quote, plus DigLab quote, plus copyright permissions if it applies, and all that. After that, it's the LRS committee and external review committee that reviews the applications in February. Then in March, the board meets to approve those recommendations. And after that, I email recipients individually on what the LRS committee and board have granted them, and then do a mass email announcement of the grant recipients. Then a little after that, we will mail out the checks and ask everyone to sign a grant agreement. Then fast forward to January, you'll have an interim report due, which I will send to you, and it's just to let us know where you are in the project and how much you have left to do. Then the final deadline is June 30th, 2025, and that's a Monday, I checked, where we ask that projects are completed and all money spent, and you'll receive a final report to fill out, and it's going to be similar to the interim report where there's not a lot of questions. So next is the application. At the moment, we only have the pre-application, but it's the same as the full application, but we can't access the full application because I'm making sure people use the pre-application. This is available on our website along with the preparation worksheet, Word doc. So I advise you, if this is your first time, or if you know you're not going to be able to finish answering all the questions in one go, use the preparation worksheet doc, as you can save your answers. Unlike Google Forms, where you'll lose whatever you've typed if you exit out. If you do use the preparation doc, it shouldn't take too long to fill out the application if you have everything prepared. And it's not meant to be overly lengthy because these aren't large amounts of money. So I'll hold off on going through the application, and we'll circle back to that if people are interested. And next are, if anybody has any questions or if there's anything you want me to expand on, I'll give it like a quick minute. And it's okay if there aren't any questions. I know I probably just threw a lot of information at you, and it will take a moment to like sink in. And it's okay if there are any questions. You can also email me afterwards, which here's my contact information. If you don't already have it, you probably have it, but here it is anyways. The phone number is correct. I'm not sure about the extension, but yes.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I had a couple questions. The first is we recently were fortunate enough to get a Catalyst grant. Are we still eligible to apply for these?
Yes.
Okay. My second one is, can you guys at your DigiLab, can you guys do like 35 millimeter film reels?
Oh, 35. We don't have any equipment that can do it, but I do know there are a couple of vendors that can do it. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that there are some. And I think there's even a few that are within the state that can do it. So, no, we can't, but there are vendors.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
And then last, you may not be able to answer this precisely, but what is a going rate, an hourly rate for someone to do metadata for you?
Oh, I'd have to see, I'd have to check on some previous on some previous applications. And I think I also need to double check on what New York State's minimum wage is, because I think I remember long time ago when I wasn't in this position, but was like an intern actually doing some of this work. I know at that time I got paid a certain amount, but then I heard that the state was increasing it. So I can get back to you on that.
Okay. I probably will end up scheduling a consultation with you anyway, but I just thought if I had you, I'd ask those questions now.
Note. I can also send that out if, with the email when I send out this recording and the slides and the link to the YouTube channel. Because I know that it's something I know probably a lot of people might be interested in knowing.
Great. I'll give it just a couple more minutes then for people. I'll just give it one more minute for people and then I'll let you go so you can continue on. But otherwise, contact information here. It's also on our website. So you probably have my email, so you can get in touch if you want to have a one-on-one meeting. And I look forward to seeing the grants we'll receive as they're actually starting to become more diverse or different. So not as many yearbooks, but some registers, museum bulletins. I know we have a couple of business ledgers going on. And of course, digitized microfilm is always really cool and it's great. And I know that one organization has microfilm, but they can't access it anymore because they don't have any functioning equipment to see it. So I know they use this grant to get it digitized and make it available to people to use, and seems to be getting a lot of hits. And it's also in an area that there isn't a lot of newspapers from, I think, in that area. So yeah, microfilm. Actually, to schedule an appointment with you, just email you, or do you have like a an office hours link or something?
Email me. I am though considering doing one of those links to where people can select times and days to like meet with me, but at the moment, just email me.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if everybody's good, I will thank you all for coming, and to those who are watching afterwards, I look forward
to hearing from all of you or having questions that I can answer. And yep, thank you all for attending. And what's it? Today's
Thank you.
yeah, happy early holidays. Bye, everyone. Oh, thank you.